So let me add my welcome to all of you as well. And let me pass on a special thanks to those of you who brought your children to the march today. I was thinking as I walked with a couple of you and had a chance to chat on the way down here, it seems to me like yesterday that my youngest daughter, who God and her instructors willing will graduate this coming May, was in a baby backpack for one of these marches, and it has gone by so fast. And my hope for you is that all of you who brought your children today will someday look back on this and have these in the same fond memories of joining together with community members, friends, people we don't even know, to help teach that next generation the importance of making a difference. So on behalf of the entire Colorado State University community, it's my pleasure to welcome all of you here to celebrate the memory and the legacy of a great American leader, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Last year at this event, I stood before you and talked about Ferguson and the ongoing cost to our nation of oppression and hatred. This year, we added still more tragic reference points to what's becoming a timeline. Charleston, Chicago, the University of Missouri. Each of these is becoming a point on a timeline that continues to unfold around us, sometimes in what feels like an unrelenting, exhausting march, trying to get to a more just and peaceful world. That feeling of exhaustion is not unique to our time. I was looking at the photo that was up on the slides while the choir was singing at the beginning, and I'm sure many of you noticed it too. There were so many emotions expressed in the faces of those people. But on Dr. Martin Luther King's face, at least I perceived, perhaps because I know the theme of this year's march and the theme of the remarks that I was going to make here, there's a tiredness behind those eyes, a look that almost, in our vernacular of today, I think my daughters would describe it with the single word, really? We're still having to push forward on these sorts of fronts. The Reverend King himself, in fact, described how weary he was in 1964 when he traveled to Oslo to accept the Nobel Peace Prize. And he wondered that day in his acceptance speech, he wondered why the prize had been awarded to, and I'll quote, a beleaguered movement committed to unrelenting struggle, a movement that had not won peace and justice as it had sought. On that day, Dr. King accepted the prize on behalf of 22 million then Black Americans, and he noted that the day before, 40 churches in Mississippi had been bombed or burned. Young people working to secure the right to vote in the South and freedom marchers had been set upon by fire hoses and snarling dogs. But the end goal, the reign of freedom and the rule of justice, those, he said, were beacons that kept them going. And as we gather today to honor Dr. King and those who fought with him in the quest for civil rights, we look to those same beacons with the knowledge that as far as we may sometimes feel we've come, we have such a long road still to travel through the land of racism to arrive at the land that those beacons herald. Racism, Dr. King wrote, and I'll quote here, is a philosophy based on a contempt for life. It is the arrogant assertion that one race is the center of value and object of devotion, before which other races must kneel in submission. It is the absurd dogma that one race is responsible for all progress of history and alone can assure the progress of the future. Racism is total estrangement. It separates not only bodies, but minds and spirits, and inevitably, it descends to inflicting spiritual and physical homicide. In my discipline, which is in the life science and medicine, some of the most devastating, and if one views them from that point of view, effective diseases are those diseases that hide. They hide from the body's immune system. They mask themselves as other things. They trick and convince the body that there's really not that much that's wrong. And in preparing my remarks this morning, I was reminded of that as I thought of racism. This absurd dogma, as Dr. King described it, has proved clever. Losing to our collective immune systems when it fights in the light of day, it has now chosen to hide, and it hides under many names. It persists under names such as the routine. It hides behind the technical. Sometimes it even has the audacity to present itself wrapped in the guise of fairness. Stripping racism of these disguises and exposing it for the absurd dogma that it is will take renewed energy and commitment on all of our parts. So knowing this, how do we then fit with this year's theme of the march? How do we move to action? How do we take up our responsibility to act? Now, certainly we all know this begins with facing the racism in ourselves, with having the moral courage to admit and confront our own prejudices, our own biases, acknowledging our own privilege, and seeking to change the world around us. It also requires that we challenge our communities and our institutions to do the same. I would suggest that our responsibility means more than lip service, more than speeches, more than symbolism. It means acting and being willing to confront racism and systemic biases within our institutions and organizations, and being unwilling, in fact, to give in to the tiredness that showed in Dr. King's eyes, being unwilling to rest until diversity, inclusion, equality, and justice are not something that we gather with our children to march for, but are the reality, not the dream. This will not be easy. It is not easy today. It's never been easy. And there are people who are working hard for diversity that face tremendous challenges, including the risk of physical violence. But we have things on our side. We have the next generation who are stepping forward in events like this and so many others to put their shoulder to the wheel, to join us, to help build on the progress that we've made. I was so proud of our students this past year and how they stepped forward in support of the students at the University of Missouri and then turned that support into action here at home with a set of recommendations for how to make Colorado State University a better place. And so knowing that, I stand here before you today to pledge on behalf of our faculty, our staff, our students, our alumni, our administration, that Colorado State University remains committed to this challenge. We will act on the recommendations of our students that came out of that November march. We will act through our new statement of principles of community to create a culture in which bullying and bias have no place. We will act to educate and create awareness through events like this spring through the Black History Month and the first ever CSU International Human Rights Film Festival. We will act to ensure equality in our hiring and promotion practices. We will act to treat all our employees with fairness and dignity, which means advocating for a living wage and affordable housing within our community. If the fundamental principle of a land-grant university was to offer everyone the chance to improve their life, and in doing so to improve the society around us, we cannot live up to that mission unless we make the following commitment. CSU will never be so afraid of criticism for a lack of perfection that we will be afraid to shine a light on the various areas that we need to improve. Our path forward has been made easier by people like Dr. King who walked it before us. They upheld their responsibility to act, and it now falls to each of us as individuals to come together as a community with the ability to change literally the world as we stand together. So as we stand here setting out to take this road together for change for another year, I'd like to close with another quote from Dr. King's Nobel acceptance speech. He said these words: "I refuse to accept the view that mankind is so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace and brotherhood can never become a reality. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word." Thank you all for being here.